Hello everyone and welcome. Today we're joined by Ollie Coburn from BASRaT. So I've known Ollie for a number of years, so I'm looking forward to finding out a bit more about him and how he got into this area. So Ollie, thank you for joining.
Pleasure, Andy. Pleasure.
And I've seen a load of activity going on, so I'm seeing you doing some of these daily things, so we'll dig more into your work for BASRaT. But whereabouts are you from originally?
Manchester lad, Stockport specifically. So I've never really gone far from home because I'm still there. I've not managed to escape, but it wouldn't be like me to leave the best city in the world anyway.
Well, is that Stockport or Manchester?
Well, Manchester, yeah.
Yeah. So how did you get involved in like the area of sports rehabilitation then? What kind of led you to that?
I guess I started out on the path to it really early. So I was a sporty kid, played rugby and lacrosse when I was younger. Massive football fan, so I, always wanted to do something sport related, and I think like lots of other people thought sports rehab and or physio was going to be the route into doing that. So my journey started really with sports rehab at the University of Salford. That was where it all really kicked off for me, and absolutely loved it straight away. Knew it was exactly what I wanted to be doing, and knew it was a field that I was going to stay in once I'd finished, which is exactly what I did.
And so like before you get into that then, so you talked about physio, there's that sports therapy was sort of starting at that time. Was there any particular reason why you wanted sports rehab?
Well, I had a funny journey into it really. So I'd applied for physio at most unis when I was applying. Salford actually got back in touch with me and said, we can see from your application that you're actually interested in working in sport and that or with sports people, and that's the area that you're looking to go into. So have you thought about this sports rehab course? And that's what made me kind of dig into it and look a little bit deeper, and that ended up being my option. Some people would say that I was crazy taking that option, but that's what I did. But yeah, I was a physio applicant and then got pushed really by the uni to go into sports rehab because they felt it was more suited to where I was coming from as an applicant.
And then, so you said you loved it straight away then. Was that something that you thought, actually, yeah, this would be better than physio anyway? So did you have any regrets whatsoever?
No, I definitely haven't got regrets, because everyone's journey is individual anyway. So you've just got to make the most of what you've got. I think what I loved the most about it was it was everything that I thought it was going to be. So when you have those visions of working with athletes or in sport or wherever else, straight away I was getting exposed to those environments and getting to go on placement. But I think I did an optional placement in my first year working with a rugby league club. So straight away in my first year, I'm thinking, right, this is exactly what I thought it was going to be. I'm with professional sports people. I'm out at pitch side. We're working in the gym, and which was when you have a vision of what you might be doing when you graduate. That was exactly what I had, and I think that was helpful. Whereas other courses, physio in particular, those placement experiences early on might have looked very different to that, and I don't know whether there would have been the same appetite and kind of love for it initially that sports rehab gave me. I've obviously ended up doing very different stuff to that now, but that's because that's where my career has taken me. It's not to say that I don't enjoy all that stuff, because I definitely do.
Yeah. And then in terms of the other people that are on the course then, do you think they had a similar sort of thing to you in terms of they knew what they were getting into? Because I've spoken to some people and they had a similar journey really, where they looked at physio, maybe even sports therapy as well, or different things. What was the general feeling on the course?
I don't know, we had a really weird year. Not weird individuals, just we had quite a lot of mature students on my course. And I don't know, there was definitely a good chunk of the year group that were in a similar position to me, I think, where they'd initially been looking at physio and they'd been pushed towards sports rehab, and then obviously certainly a cohort of people that clearly hadn't necessarily looked into it and assumed it was something that it wasn't. And I think you get that, you know, and actually unis are now a lot better at informing applicants and students about what they're getting themselves into and what it entails, involves, what the career options are afterwards, etc. Which maybe wasn't the case when I was going to uni. But yeah, we had quite a lot of mature students, and I don't think there's actually that many of us left in the industry, which we graduated with a cohort of about 20-ish of us graduated. And there's maybe 8 of us left, sort of working full time in the industry. So, which from what I understand, to be fair, is fairly typical.
Yeah. Yeah, is that even the case for people working in those sort of professions? So yours is a very vocational degree.
Yeah.
So what are the other guys doing then? Like it's
a bit of a split, really. There's a few, you know, work in sport. So you know, won't name drop, but there's a few around professional sports clubs here and there. A couple of guys still in the military, doing the military rehab stuff, and lecturing. A few of the others have moved into. So pretty varied, and obviously clinic. It's quite a few still a few holding down clinic jobs, and then there's also a small group of them that have gone on and done physio after their initial sports rehab degree, and they're in all sorts of roles. I think one of the girls in particular that went on and did physio is now doing nothing MSK or sport related whatsoever. I think she's in like a cardio resp job. So yeah, there's been some interesting journeys, I think, from people, and of course some people have left the profession entirely and have done the usual grad scheme things with various different companies, because at the end of the day, a degree is a degree, isn't it? And
yeah, it's hard at 18. It's difficult, isn't it, picking what you want to be doing for the rest of your life. So it's inevitably going to get a few people changing what they're doing. And so throughout the time that you were there, then did you kind of change your goal of what you wanted to do, or were you always very clear?
I think I probably did change a little bit, in that I realised that as much as I would have enjoyed working in professional sport full time, probably wasn't going to be realistic for me, just in terms of the sort of lifestyle and work that I wanted to have. You know, I probably naively initially thought, you know, oh, it'd be, you know, pretty good work-life balance, pretty good money, blah blah blah, working pro sport. It's obviously not the case. and that was something that I wanted, and then I obviously went straight into private practice out of uni with sport work on the side, which allowed it to be more flexible than a full-time role in pro sport. So yeah, it definitely did change, but I don't think it changed because of the kind of content of the degree or the profession itself. It was definitely more about me than it was the profession as to why that direction changed. And yeah, and then of course I set up A&C Rehab with John T. Ashton straight out of uni, and that was our first clinic, and we grew that to 2 clinics within a couple of years, and that was where it all started for me.
So for that then, so what made you want to set up your own clinic? That's quite a bold thing to do coming out of university, newly grads, not probably got any clients, I wouldn't have thought, and you're going straight in with John C doing that.
Yeah, we had 0 clients whatsoever. I don't know, I think in hindsight, would I have done it differently? I mean, I speak to loads of graduates now, or third-year students or whatever, and they always say that if they're interested in getting private practice, and my advice to them now is slightly different to what I did. It would be, it's never a bad idea to go and work in other private practices, see what's being done well, what you could improve on, just generally how is a practice run, because I think that's so much of the stuff that I didn't know, and we just decided to dive into it. I think we were both pretty business minded, both very, very confident in terms of our ability to build a business, work for ourselves, and go into that. But with the benefit of hindsight, my God, we were naive. Like, we didn't know what we didn't know. You know, that old saying. And we definitely have done things differently now, I think. But I don't regret it at all. We just had that mindset of, yeah, we can do this for ourselves. We don't need to go and work for anyone else. And it was definitely the confidence, I think, that led that. And do you know what? We ended up doing okay. We ended up doing okay with it, and it was just the start of our journey.
So in terms of that then, where do you think that confidence came from? Is that something that you guys had just naturally got anyway, or was it something that you got from, did the course talk to you about entrepreneurship and building business?
So the course didn't actually. We had some pretty good mentors around us that were in private practice, that were involved in and around with the university. So one in particular was Mike Carolan. He was the clinical supervisor of the uni clinic at the time, but he was also working in private practice with Sports Rehab UK at the time, which was his business. So sort of Mike was really supportive at the time of that and gave us the encouragement and sort of belief that we could go and do it. But I think, yeah, inherently we were just very confident people. Me and John played rugby together, so we already had that sort of relationship. Both very similar personality types, very outgoing and confident, and I think that helped. We kind of went into it almost no fear and a blind, this will be successful. And to an extent, I think, if you believe that hard enough, you'll achieve it. And yeah, it was an interesting one. It's actually one of the areas, I'm glad you touched on it, is we really know that students want and need to know more about business. So there's a resource we're working on at the minute with Elevate and Andy Hosgood that we'll have coming out soon in terms of that business content, which is something I wish we'd had, because we went into it and learned on the go. Whereas I think if people can have a bit more preparedness coming out of uni, then we'd see more people setting up in private practice for themselves, which would be a good thing.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, yeah, I was actually looking at Mike's artwork just before we came on here. Actually, he's a very good artist, isn't he? So
very talented. Yeah, very talented.
Yeah, no, it's good. And then Andy's stuff. I mean, Andy's stuff looks great. So
yeah,
I think I've seen that he's promoting a lot about selling, and that's one of the things from our side as a seller of equipment. It's that challenge between speaking with clinicians that want to sell. So that's good if you're working with Andy and Elevate on that, because I think it's a massive component and probably would have been really helpful for you when you were setting up your clinic. So once you've done that, then how did it go then? So what was that experience like? Did you maintain your level of confidence? Did you ever think, what are we doing here, or what?
Yeah, definitely thought that. Yeah, we how did it go? I don't know, is the honest answer. We certainly did our best and we had a good crack at it. Yeah, we definitely had days where we doubted whether or not it was going to work, but we always kept moving up. We learned on the job, so things improved. The further we got into it, the quicker things improved, became more formalized. We got more systems and processes in place that we needed to have in place, and it all gradually became more and more professional, which is completely different to how it would look if I was setting up a clinic now. So M20, for example, is a world away from what we were doing, with A&C. The learning on the job wasn't helpful, because I think when we went into it initially, and because we didn't know what we didn't know, we didn't start out on the best footing, and I think that was where the doubt crept in. So it was kind of like we'd find a problem, fix it, and then we'd be like, right, yeah, we're good to go again. That's going to solve all our problems. We'll crack on. But yeah, I mean, did we do okay? Yeah, we did okay. We managed to grow it from 1 clinic to 2. Our location wasn't ideal with the first clinic. The facility was amazing, so we had our own room within a gym that was in a big industrial unit, tons of equipment, tons of space, like literally a dream for rehab. But we were too far out of any populous area, and for our target market of people, they weren't local enough to the clinic in order for it to work, and for us to have the footfall. So we definitely fell down on that front. And I don't think it was anything that necessarily that we did wrong with the business itself, with the clinic itself. It was a rookie error in not realizing how important location and setting was, which we improved on with the second one. So the second one was a much better location, really populous area, you know, fairly affluent, which if you're a clinic owner helps. What we didn't have with the second one was the same abundance of rehab space. So if we could have taken the space from one and the location of the other and mashed them together, it would have been a completely different beast, I think. But yeah, we did okay. We did okay. The A&C actually came to an end when the opportunity came up for Jonty to take a lecturing post at the Uni of Hull, and he's still there now. And I was looking at it at the time. I had other bits of work on. I can't remember exactly what it was I was doing at the time. I definitely would have been working for BASRaT in some capacity. I think I was doing my masters at the time, and probably doing something in sport, and maybe a little bit of teaching at the University of Salford. So I was, like always, spinning lots of plates, and decided that I couldn't really take it forward on my own. So at that point, we decided to call it quits, and I maintained some private work, kind of on an individual basis away from A&C. But that's how it came to an end, and that was in, I want to say 2017, 2018, something like that. It's all kind of a blur now. It was something pre-COVID. Something pre-COVID.
Yeah. So what would your advice be now for someone setting up a new clinic? What three or so points would you say are the most important things to be aware of?
Right. So research 100% has to be done. You know, where am I going to be? Who's around me? What's the gap in the market? What makes me unique? What can I offer that isn't currently on offer? You know, and how do I fit within whatever my desired location is? I suppose tying into that, the second one would be planning. Have a plan for everything. Have your processes in place. Have all your standard operating procedures, systems, everything. That whole patient journey from how am I going to find them, how am I going to bring them into my clinic, all the way through to assessing them, treating them, rehabbing them, discharging them, all of that stuff. Have a plan and a process in place for everything. And standardize it and do it with everyone. And the third one is get a decent mentor. So find someone who's already done it, who's already made the mistakes, who can share their experience of making the mistakes so that you don't, and that now has gone on and done something successfully, and can help you with how to do that. 100% a mentor is important. So they've been my three. There's definitely more, but research, plan it, get a mentor.
No, they're good. It's funny, isn't it? Because it's like the clinical aspect, that's the easy bit, isn't it? It's everything else surrounding it that makes it that business.
Yeah, 100%. I think the clinical, you become a better clinician over time. It's the old, really, but I hate using it. It's the boring driving analogy, isn't it? It's when you learn to drive, you essentially learn to pass your test, and then you become a better driver. And it's a bit like that with being a clinician. You know, you get through your degree, you get your registration, and then actually you become a much better clinician once you're out there doing it and seeing patients on the day-to-day. It's very much the same. So the clinical bits kind of take care of itself, but it's everything else around it that's going to make you a good business. You know, so have your brand nailed, for example. People don't teach us how to do that. Communicate well. You know, communicate professionally, communicate clearly, and communicate well. Be able to have empathy, build rapport, all of that stuff that's non-clinical is so important in terms of making you a successful business. Because if you can't communicate with people, build relationships with people, and they don't like you, you're not going to have a successful business. And same goes for not having a good brand and not having systems and processes in place. You're just not going to you're not going to make it if you've not got that, to an extent. It's perfect, but it needs to be there.
Yeah, no, I agree. No, they're really interesting points, and I definitely would agree with all of those. And in terms of your involvement with BASRaT, then, at what point did that happen?
That's really early, actually. So I think, was it 2014, 13, 14, I started with BASRaT. And I literally started out just helping with some office stuff. It was a much smaller organisation at the time. Steve Aspinall was chair, and he was one of my lecturers at Salford Uni. I think I'd sort of expressed an interest in helping in any way that I could, and it just so happened at the time they were looking for someone to do some hours in the office, and that was how I got into it. And I suppose over the 8 years that I've been involved with BASRaT now, I've learned every nook and cranny, the answer to every question, and I think I've also been involved, or at least very close to, all of the development and growth that's happened within the organisation over the past 8 years. So leading up to where we are now, because I've been on that journey, my understanding of where we've been and where we're going is there, which is really helpful. But that's obviously been built over 8 years, and my role's changed over that time. Obviously, I don't really do the office stuff anymore per se. My role is more policy related. Policy and regulation is essentially my bag at BASRaT. So it's much more strategic, I guess, rather than day-to-day running of the organisation. But it's been really interesting, and there's a huge future for our profession and obviously our organisation as part of that, which is going to be exciting.
So what is the vision for that then? Because it seems like it's a really progressive thing, and in the time that I've known you, I can see that it's loads of things have been happening with it. And we've been to some of your conferences, we've sponsored some of those, and it does seem like it's thriving. But where does BASRaT want to get to?
So we've got, I suppose it's useful to some extent to understand the kind of three things that we do, the three main things that we do. So we're, of course, an accrediting organisation, so we look after everything on the education side. We accredit those university courses that make people eligible to apply for registration. So in terms of that, the curriculum will continue to develop, ensure that it's evidence-based, and ensure that it's keeping up with what our idea of contemporary practice is in the MSK world. So there's obviously a lot of development that goes into that on a yearly basis in terms of reviewing, well, what is the curriculum now and what does it need to look like in order to stay contemporary? So that will keep moving forward, and that will happen on an international basis as well. So we'll do that with our sort of partner organisations in different countries, and that will be standardised. Our second sort of prong is the membership side of things. So within that, you've got all the membership support, guidance, member benefits, insurance, etc. that we offer. And with those, really, we'll largely just try and keep doing what we're doing, providing as much support as we possibly can, keeping everybody informed of what's going on in the industry, and ensuring that everybody can thrive. The third is regulation. So obviously a professional standards authority accredited register. That's the contemporary form of regulating a profession. So I know there's loads of chat always about HCPC registration and statutory regulation and all that. There's currently no appetite within government to statutory regulate any further professions. That's not a model of regulation that is cost effective or even effective, full stop, necessarily for the government. And it's now acknowledged by the HCPC themselves, by government, by Department of Health and Social Care and everyone else that's involved, that future professions that will be subject to regulation in healthcare will be done so via the PSA's Accredited Register, which we, of course, already are. So that and that's largely where my work is centred with BASRaT, is on that side of things. Of course, from an overarching professional thing and where we're going and what we're doing, we intend for the profession to grow in the UK. So we want to solidify our position within the industries that GSRs are currently working in. So that's sport across all levels. private practice and independent sector, corporate MSK and occupational health, military, and the emerging one would be the NHS. And we of course want to develop each of those areas where possible and expand them, and find new areas where GSR's skills might be able to be utilised to, you know, make the population healthier. We're of course part of an international profession now as well. So as of this year, we've got the mutual agreement in place with the US, Canada and Ireland. So our members can go, if they wish, and apply to be registered athletic trainers or therapists in each of those countries, with the international opportunities that brings. And we'll keep working with those international partners as well to grow the profession globally. From the 60,000 that it's at approximately at the moment internationally, and that will keep growing, and hopefully more countries will join the agreement, and you know, we'll truly make it global.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned athletic trainers then. So do you see that as being a very similar role to the GSRs? Yeah,
so they are. It's essentially the same profession, just with a different title in those countries. So in terms of the arrangement that we've got with the US, Canada and Ireland, what's had to happen in order to get that is the curriculum and the role of the professions have been mapped against each other to identify all those similarities, and we've essentially had to match that up through a very lengthy process. But in doing that, it's been recognised that there's equivalency there, and therefore we'll recognise your training programs as eligible for the exams in our country. So in doing that, it's not, do we think that they're an equivalent profession? It's no, they are. We've been through the mapping process in order to determine that. And that's what really makes sports rehab from a UK perspective. That's what really makes us unique.
Yeah.
Because we're the only profession in the MSK industry that has that in place with these other countries.
Yeah, so that's is that where it originated from then? Because I've been aware of the athletic trainer I've been working with the States for a while. So is that where the graduate sports rehab degree came from?
So I guess so, in a roundabout way. In the UK, it actually came from physios. So Julian Thatcher and a group of other physios that were working in sport at the time essentially identified that the physio training provision at the time didn't really cater for the athletic population very well, and that it was very much that bucket and sponge type provision, and there was a huge gap between what sports science and exercise people were doing and what the physiotherapy profession was doing. And then as a group of physios wanted to fill that gap with a healthcare profession that could cater for initially the sort of athletic sport population, and that's where the course came from. And so the original curriculum was written to fill that gap and suit, i.e. what would the perfect professional look like, what knowledge and skills would they have. And then the first two courses were Uni of Salford and St Mary's Twickenham that began delivering it, and I think they started in '97 with their first graduating cohort in 2000. So we're really young actually as a profession, and of course it's developed since, because the curriculum's been updated and made contemporary, and we've also diversified the role and the areas in which GSRs work to not just be sport and athletic populations, because of course the same principles can be applied universally. But yeah, that's where it came from. Whether or not it was stolen from athletic training, maybe, I don't know. I don't know to what extent the original people that came up with the idea, I don't know what knowledge they had of what was going on in the US at that time. But they certainly did a pretty good job of copying it, because of course you'll know this, Andy, that in Canada, so North America in particular, athletic training therapy is in the sports world is the go-to profession. So particularly in the US, your major sports, the medical teams will be predominantly made up of athletic trainers, and they'll often lead departments alongside the other members of the medical team. That's obviously not the case in the UK, in that teams are predominantly led by physios. So although they are multidisciplinary, they have a bit of everything thrown in, the model does look quite different. But I think that's by virtue of athletic training existing in the US for a lot longer, and probably had the benefit of already being in existence and already being a profession as sports became more professional and organised and moved from a slightly disorganised amateur model through to the absolute behemoth business that sport is now. For example, if, let's say, sports rehab had existed in the 70s and 80s, before a sport like rugby became professional, we might have seen that medical teams looked very different in rugby now. Although we are moving towards the point where there's no real difference whether you're a physio or a sports rehab. We're going in the right direction. But yeah, that's just one of the pitfalls of being a new profession, is it takes time for the system to catch up, I guess.
Yeah, and then we employ a couple of sports therapists as well, and one of the issues they had was the HCPC that they thought they were going to get at that point. Is there any? How do you find, for one, the sports therapy course and how it compares or differs to sports rehab? And then, in terms of numbers and things, are you still getting a high uptake of people wanting to do the sports rehab course?
Yeah, so I suppose the second bit of your question is easier to answer than the first. Demand's still through the roof. We've got tons and tons of people that want to come and do sports rehab. I think this year in particular, it's been a very easy sell for the courses, because regulation with the PSA is in place. So there's that level of recognition there, acknowledgement that we're a regulated health, or registered and regulated healthcare profession in the UK. Of course, we've got things like the international arrangement and international opportunities that brings. So yeah, demand for sports rehabs through the roof currently at the unis, which is great to see. But having said that, demand for every healthcare profession is through the roof at the moment. I think, is it nursing? I've seen like a 300% increase in applications since the pandemic, because everyone wants to be a nurse. So that's probably a system-wide change, I would imagine. In terms of sports therapy, I mean, it's always a hard question to answer, because nothing's necessarily standardized in sports therapy. So as you'll know, there's different associations and organizations involved in the sports therapy world, and they offer different routes of training, different levels of training, different content across degrees. So it's hard to speak to it as a whole. I mean, I'm always sort of keen to differentiate sports rehab away from sports therapy. We're not homogenous, we're not the same profession. And I do that because across our degrees, we do have that standardized educational framework, and it is degree level across the board. So I know that there are associations in sports therapy that are degree level. So the SST would be an example, but there are also those that aren't. And I think the HCPC barrier is almost a red herring for sports therapy, because firstly, it's not going to happen because the HCPC have already acknowledged that there's no appetite to add future professions to the register, and the government themselves have no appetite to add to the number of statutory regulated professions. But also, more and more employers now are moving to competency-based recruitment, so they're not necessarily as bothered about the badge you've got or what register you belong to or whatever. And so in some contexts it will be important, and it'll be needed for some things. But more and more, it's becoming about the skills and knowledge that somebody has, and I think that's what's most important. But yeah, sports therapy would be massively helped with if it was a bit more clear in terms of educational levels. And you could be a sports therapist that's done a level 5 qualification, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I'm not bashing those people whatsoever. But you can also be a sports therapist with a PhD, and yet on the surface you might not be able to differentiate between those two people if they say, I'm a sports therapist, for example. I think that's always a tricky one. The work we've got to do at BASRaT is building awareness amongst the healthcare professional community that if somebody's a sport rehabilitator and they're on the BASRaT register, it means that they've got this level of education and this scope of practice. And that's our job, to build that awareness, so that it actually means something, because that's all regulation does, really. It's just a badge. It's just and if somebody says, oh, I'm a physiotherapist, they can only do that if they're a registered physiotherapist, and that reassures somebody that that person has had X level of training and has X scope of practice. So in many ways, it's an exercise in branding. And if we can achieve that same level of awareness for our register, then in effect it'll be no different.
Yeah, no, well, good luck with that then. I'll be interested to watch that. And then alongside all of this, you've got a recent project which you've mentioned very briefly to me. We had a meeting a few months back. Do you want to update me on how that's going? Yeah,
so we've launched Freehab. Freehab is a social enterprise, so we're not a profit-driven company, and our mission is to provide advice, support and rehab to people who need it without any financial barriers whatsoever, so they can access our service without any charge. And we fund the business through voluntary contributions. So if you weren't in the position that you were in with your job, Andy, and perhaps somebody on a very low income or no income, but you needed our support, you could come to us, access our advice, access our service, you get your rehab plan, off you go, you've got the help you need, and you could choose to not pay us at all. Or if you really enjoyed your experience and you thought we were really helpful and brilliant, and you could choose to contribute whatever amount you felt comfortable with, which might be £5 or £10 or whatever. So that's how we're funding it. The aim really is to help as many people as we possibly can. That's our intention, and we're just trying to scale that up slowly. So we're working at a community level at the moment with some local GPs here in Stockport, and now they're sort of almost acting as a front door for us and triaging appropriate patients that would benefit from our service, that may not necessarily meet the threshold for a referral to secondary care, which is obviously massively under pressure at the moment. So where the GPs might just be advising self-management ordinarily, we're providing that additional option where the patient can get a lot more input and support to optimise their recovery. And that's the gap we're trying to fill, really, for people who, for financial reasons, are excluded from accessing the private market, because it isn't cheap. I mean, there's always the interprofessional discussions, aren't there, about, oh, what should we be charging for our services? And we don't want to devalue ourselves, which is all absolutely true. But I think what we have to acknowledge when we work in private practice is not everybody can afford to access that. And in private practice, we serve a certain sector of the population that are typically, compared to the rest, very well off, comfortable, affluent. Because if somebody can afford £50 an hour for your services, then in the grand scheme of things, then they're fairly affluent. Because £50 to a lot of people is, a couple of weeks food shopping. So yeah, we're aiming to help those that are currently financially excluded, and that's our ongoing project. Still very new, but if people want to go and check it out, it's freehab.co.uk, and all the info's on our site.
No, that sounds really good. So is it delivered physically then? So is it not a remote platform or?
Yes, we're remote. So people book through our website. Everything happens automatically. We've got going back to systems and processes. Everything happens automatically, and then they'll have a 1 hour. Well, actually, before the 1 hour consultation, they fill out a questionnaire, pre-appointment questionnaire. So we're able to actually pre-screen, gather a lot of information about the patient and what they're seeking help with before they actually have that appointment. And that allows us to kind of filter out people that may not be appropriate, or in worst case scenarios might require a more urgent sort of input or care face to face. So we do that, and then they have a 1 hour video appointment with the opportunity for us to go through a full assessment and then discuss some education, advice, reassurance, all the usual stuff. And we then send out a rehab program to them via Rehab Guru. We're working with Guru, and you know, that'll be a predetermined length of time. And then there's 2 opportunities then for them through the duration of that program to check in for further video consults, just so that we can keep them on track and moving forward. And the idea is that by the end of that 3rd appointment, people are able to self-manage and continue their rehab on their own.
Sounds really interesting. Yeah. So like, where do you hope to take that then?
In an ideal world, I'd sort of like to become the next parkrun. I know that's ambitious, but we really are trying to build a brand. So what we'd like to be is the go-to place for self-referral for people who otherwise wouldn't be able to get that service. And with that, essentially what we're hoping is that our business will be funded not by the patients who use it, but by commercial partners who are interested in being partnered with us because they share our values and our vision, and that's what we really want. So of course, to achieve that, we need to have a good level of exposure. We need to have lots of people visiting our website and using our service, because otherwise commercially we're not going to be an attractive partner. But in time, if we can achieve that, what that will allow us to do is have secure funding to actually run the service, and in turn we'll then be able to provide that service to patients who need it, and you know, to more of those patients who need it. So that's where we're aiming for.
No, very good.
I think it might take a while.
Oh, well, you never know. You never know. It might sort of catch fire. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So other than that project, what are the other things on your plan to be doing going forward? Yeah,
so I've got, I'm still doing a little bit of work clinically at M20 Health. That's very limited at the moment. I sort of do it as and when, partly to alleviate pressure from the guys because they're very busy at M20 at the moment. I'm on a few other groups and committees, but probably the main one that I'm involved with is I'm part of the comms committee for the World Federation of Athletic Training and Therapy. So we've got some projects ongoing there, and we're trying to really improve the communications from that organisation to promote our profession globally. So involved with that, and yeah, trying to get back into my running, trying to spend some time with the family, trying to have a social life, all the usual.
Yeah, very good. And then you've mentioned a couple of people already, but who would you say has had that big impact or influence on your career to date?
Oh, that's a great question. Probably, so definitely career-wise, so not necessarily speaking clinically, career-wise, Steve Aspinall has obviously been huge. Still currently my boss at BASRaT. He's the chief exec, but he's always been an amazing sounding board for sort of career direction and whatever else, and has been incredibly supportive of me personally. So yeah, Steve's been a huge influence. I think business wise, there's lots of people that I sort of look to and follow. I'm always very inspired by the work that Jack Chew is doing. You know, you'll be aware of Jack and his work. And I meet up with Jack sort of semi-regularly for a coffee because he's not far away from me. And we have a chat, and I always come away from that sort of reinvigorated and inspired to do something new. So Jack's definitely had a big impact, and more recently Andy Hosgood. I'll give Andy a shout because we've really recently been doing work together on the business handbook for that we're going to put out for BASRaT members and BASRaT students. But Andy's been a great sounding board for me with basically coming up with the idea of Freehab and building it and doing that and supporting that business journey. He's really been phenomenal of late. So yeah, has to get a mention. They'd probably be my two biggest ones, but I'm conscious that I'm really early in my career, so I think you definitely go on a journey and you find new people to become inspired by and seek support from as you go along. So I'm excited for who I'm going to find support from in the future. I'm also excited for who I can support. I've had some amazing conversations with recent graduates actually recently that have got in touch and have wanted to have a chat about what they're going to do next. And I really enjoy that and getting to talk to them about what direction their career is going to go in. So I guess I get to put the shoe on the other foot now and then.
No, absolutely. No, you've always been really driven and sort of forward thinking with our interactions. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how BASRaT goes and Freehab and the other projects that you're working on. So I'll let you get back to working on all of those projects now then. So,
yeah, got a busy afternoon. I've got no doubt we'll catch up soon, Andy.
Definitely. No, really appreciate your time. Thanks, Ollie, and we'll speak soon.
See you soon.